It seems like both sides of the aisle are kind of focusing on the technology world and things that have gone awry and potential for more regulation. John, you think that that's the feeling that you get right now?
I think it's in between the two. I think most of the leaders, both Democrats and Republicans, realize that innovation is where job creation is going to occur. Every company becomes a technology company, but there are very legitimate issues we have to solve, such as privacy, such as trade. But the key takeaway is, what do we look like as an innovation nation, a startup nation, 1, 3, and 5 years out? And that's really the message that we're conveying at TechNet, our 21st trip to Washington, if you can imagine, since we were founded in 1997.
And Greg, what do you think? What is the feeling in the Valley right now in terms of what it means if regulators get far more involved than they have to this point? Because you do see both sides of the aisle raising some questions about privacy, raising some questions about other things. They may realize, each of these individual congressmen or senators, that they want this sector to continue to thrive. But watching some of the missteps along the way, watching some of the public reaction to that, they may feel that they want to have a bigger say in how these things run.
Well, companies want to understand what the ground rules are. They're comfortable with regulation, but what they don't want to do is they don't want to have it state by state. So they want privacy on a federal level. We think it's incredibly important, and I think what you're hearing is that companies are ready for it. So I think it's fine. I think they're comfortable with it. We just need to know what the ground rules are.
Do you think there's a clear idea from Washington what those ground rules would be at this point? Because I don't.
Yeah, that's definitely the hardest part, no question. And that's part of the message what we want to share with Congress, is that that's one of their key roles and responsibilities. Help set the ground rules, work with companies so that it works for all companies, large and small. We need to make sure there isn't a lot of unintended consequences, because I think about what we deal with in implementing GDPR. If that is the case with small companies, it's going to really make it difficult for them to thrive, and that's a key part of the economy. So we need to make sure it works for both.
Right. GDPR being, of course, the rules that were just passed this last year in Europe.
Correct.
John, if the European guide is not the way to go, what do you think would make sense from a regulatory framework?
Well, I think part of the European guide was right. There was one policy across all of Europe, but they tended to focus on that policy for the big companies, and the unintended consequences, it slowed down dramatically their startup engine and job creation engine. So I think this is where the technology companies, the government leaders ought to say, how do we outline something that gets the privacy needs very legitimate, accomplished? It's very important the large companies go more than halfway to meet with government on that. But we've got to understand, if we destroy our future in terms of small companies not being able to compete, not add the jobs, we'll continue to see the number of startups slide. And the startups in the U.S. are close to a 20-year low. Those will be the job creation engine for the future. And I think the unintended consequences that Greg said are absolutely right. Or put a different way, how do we accomplish both goals, but perhaps a lighter touch for the small companies?
Greg, do you think that there are a few big bad players that have not protected their data privacy, or that maybe have a business model that is different than a lot of other players in Silicon Valley, and that's the reason there's so much attention being paid to this right now?
Well, I think companies have grown very, very fast, and they're trying to come up with what are the right rules to play by. I think what Mark Zuckerberg had talked about this past week is, I think the large companies are ready for regulation. But again, it's hard for them to say what those rules are. They want to work with policymakers. And so we think it's right to work with the largest companies, but also, as John and I both said, we've got to be sensitive to understanding what the impact is for startups. Because if we stifle their growth, we know that those are the job creators in the United States. And so if we impact them, the numbers that John talked about are going to get even worse. So we need rules that apply to the large companies, but also being sensitive to the small companies as well.